Everyone assumes the person without a tattoo just never found the right design. But what if that's not it at all? What if the blank skin isn't emptiness, but a statement so quiet, so deeply internal, that most people never even think to read it? Today, we're not talking about tattoos, we're talking about you, and the specific architecture of a mind that looks at permanent ink and says without shame, without hesitation, no. Here's what most people get wrong. They assume the tattoo person is the more expressive one, the braver one, the one who's more in touch with identity and meaning and self. But neuroscience tells a very different story. In 2015, researchers at the University of Westminster studied personality traits across people who chose body modification versus those who didn't. What they found quietly shattered the popular assumption. The people who abstained from tattooing didn't score lower on self-expression or individuality. In many cases, they scored higher on something called need for cognitive closure, the psychological tendency to think carefully before committing, to sit with ambiguity, to resist the rush of a decision that feels good today but lives on your skin forever. That's not fear. That's a very particular kind of discipline. Let's talk about the brain for a moment. When someone decides to get a tattoo, there is a real, unmeasurable dopamine event happening inside their head. The anticipation, the identity shift, the social reward, the mirror moment afterward. Dopamine is the brain's currency of desire, of wanting, of reaching forward. And getting tattooed is, neurologically speaking, a deeply satisfying experience for the brains that are wired for it. But here's what I've noticed, and this is something I find genuinely fascinating. Not every brain is equally moved by that kind of external symbol making. Some minds locate identity differently, not on the surface, not in something visible and declarable, but somewhere internal, somewhere that doesn't need to be seen by strangers on the street to feel real. Psychologists call this internal locus of identity, and people who possess it tend to define themselves through values, through thought patterns, through how they move through the world, rather than through visible markers. Your identity isn't something you wear, it's something you know. There's also something worth understanding about permanence. The human brain contains a region called the prefrontal cortex, the seat of long-term thinking, consequence evaluation, and what neuroscientists lovingly call temporal discounting, which is the brain's ability to weigh future outcomes against present desires. People who consistently choose not to tattoo often have a more active relationship with this region, not because they're cold or overthinking, but because they genuinely feel time differently. They hold the future closer. They imagine the version of themselves at 50 looking down, and that version of themselves matters in the present tense. A 2019 study out of Rutgers University found that people with stronger future self-continuity, meaning they feel a stronger psychological connection to who they will be, not just who they are less likely to make irreversible choices under emotional conditions. This is a quiet superpower. It doesn't look like anything from the outside, but it is running constantly in the background, keeping you anchored to a longer arc than today. Now, I want to say something that I think goes unspoken in this conversation. There is real social pressure to mark yourself, to declare something, to belong to a visual tribe. Tattoos have tribal roots that go back tens of thousands of years. Anthropologists have found evidence of tattooing in ancient Egypt, in the Polynesian islands, in the mummified remains of Siberian nomads from 500 BC. The ink was about belonging, about ritual, about saying, I am one of these people and not one of those. The tribal brain inside all of us still responds to that pull. The brain chemical oxytocin, often associated with bonding and social belonging, has been shown to activate during group rituals, including shared physical experiences like tattooing. When a friend gets a tattoo to match yours, something warm and ancient moves through both of you. So when you consistently feel unmoved by that pull, when the tribal invitation doesn't quite land, it doesn't mean you don't value connection. It means your belonging is constructed differently. It likely runs deeper than aesthetics. You bond through ideas, through shared experience, through the invisible threads of genuinely knowing someone. From my perspective, that kind of connection is rarer, and I think, in the long run, more durable. There's also a thread of psychology here that almost no one talks about. Some people don't get tattoos because they have an unusually fluid sense of self, not unstable, fluid. They change, they evolve. They shed old versions and grow into new ones so naturally, so regularly, that the idea of locking any version of themselves into permanence feels almost philosophically wrong. The psychologist Carl Rutgers wrote about the fully functioning person, someone who is open to experience, lives without rigid defensiveness, and trusts the ongoing process of becoming over the comfort of having arrived. I've come to believe that many people who never tattoo themselves are living this way without knowing the theory behind it. They resist the permanent declaration not out of indecision, but out of an almost instinctive loyalty to their own becoming. They know they are not finished. They know that who they are today is not the final answer, and something in them refuses to pretend otherwise. There's a final piece of this I want to leave you with. In a world that is increasingly loud, that rewards declaration, performance, and the visible proof of identity, choosing not to mark yourself is quietly radical. It says something that doesn't need saying out loud. It says, I know who I am. I don't need the wall to hold the painting. I am the painting. That kind of self-possession is not common, and it is almost never recognized for what it actually is, because by its very nature, it doesn't announce itself. It seems to me that the people most grounded in themselves are rarely the ones you can read from across the room. They are the ones who get closer before they reveal anything, who take time, who hold something back, not from fear, but from a deep, practiced understanding that not everything real needs to be shown. Your blank skin is not an absence. It is a refusal, and a choice, and a kind of knowledge about yourself that runs so deep it never needed ink to become true. The psychology of people who don't get tattoos is ultimately the psychology of people who carry their identity inward, where no needle can reach and no fading can touch. If this felt like something you recognized in yourself, stay curious about that recognition, because in the next exploration, we're going to look at another psychological trait that quietly separates certain minds from the crowd. Something about how specific people process silence differently and what that reveals about the brain's deepest architecture. It might be the most clarifying thing you've heard about yourself in a long time.